Ladies, gentlemen, and my often forgotten, but certainly not by me, Aram's Wands, welcome to the channel and welcome to another video. In this video, we're going to be going over example rotations for the hybrid DPS guide. Before we get into the video, I have a couple sellout things per usual. I have a community Discord linked in the description below, and if you would be so kind as to hit that subscribe button, it'd be greatly appreciated. Anyways though, on to the example rotations. How this video is going to work is I'm just going to briefly go over the rotation and talk about it real quick, and then showcase the example. So starting off with Magic Range Brid. This isn't really used in too many places. I mostly do this as a for fun setup at Solak or Glaycore, and I've seen some uses at Carapac for record setups, although I don't know if they're used still. But typically in a hybrid setup between the two combat styles, I will do a general magic rotation for Sunshine, and usually I will use my APOT with Sunshine. Usually at the tail end of my Sunshine, I will then go ahead and swap over, usually a second or two, or I'll just leave the last tick of Sunshine for the swap, and then immediately swap over to my bow and use something like Rapid Fire and Gricko to try and build up Death Spore stacks. Now it would be nice if Death Spore stacks were a little bit easier to build up, such as hit based where all I needed was Gricko. However, I'm not going to ramble on about Death Spore woes in this video. Once I have the stacks built up, then I go into a Death Swift rotation. And the nice thing here is the setup for this type of hybrid is not too complex at all. The crit buffing ultimates being Incendiary Shot and Tsunami, they're self-contained within their ultimates, meaning that you don't have to worry about things like late Meteor, late Nami, or anything like that. They're self-contained in their own ultimates, so it's much easier conceptually to get the hang of hybriding. Now, as far as my keybinds are concerned and what I use to switch between the two, I will have a keybind video linked in the description below, and I'll have a card in the upper right-hand corner, so you can see more in depth about the binds I use to swap between the two. But real quickly, all I'm doing is either holding shift or control and then just mashing all of my thumb buttons in one fluid motion just from front to back. And that's all I'm doing. Now I should also mention that for all of these setups, I pretty much am using a full crit build. I'm using Calg Demon, Reaver's Ring, and Grim just to try and get as much crit buff as possible. Being as 2 of the 3 combos use magic and magic needs crits, it kind of makes sense that range would fall in with Death Spore and melee falls in with Meteor, etc, etc. Alright, so let's actually do an example rotation of what this would look like. So we'll go ahead and start off with a Sunshine with APOT, target cycle with a G-Conk into a D-Breath, maybe hit Auto Magma, go for the Tsunami, swap over to Xang, hit Staff Spec, swap to Dual Wield, G-Conk, Wild Magic into a 2-hit Asphyx, into another G-Conk, into a Omni. I'm gonna go ahead and use an ABS back here. Another one just for funsies. Need some adrenaline here, so I'll hit a G-Conk, and I'll go ahead and hit 10D since we're starting to get to the tail end of this spec. D-Breath into a Wild Magic, and another G-Conk. Swap over to range, hit a Gricko. We already got our buff there, luckily, with Gricko, so Incendiary. Into the DS, and now we can just start our rotation. Swap over to the other arrow choice, which happens to be full, into a Staff Spec. Gricko. ECB, and I'll go ahead and rapid fire here just to help build up some crits. Maybe into a Tendrils. Into a Gricko. A Snipe. Snapshot. Debo got a Relent proc, that was kind of nice. Into another Gricko. Maybe into another rapid fire. Range rotations vary a bit based on the adrenaline gain, more so than magic. But then after that, I would just simply build up into another Sun and go on from there, and that's where the cycle ends up repeating itself. So as you can see in those rotations, Tsunami is contained within the Sunshine rotation, and with range, Incendiary Shot is contained within the Death Swiftness, so they kind of operate independently of each other, but you're still taking advantage of the fact that the cooldown for DS and Sun is 1 minute, and they only last 37 seconds, so you're getting more damage off sooner. Now, as far as EOF usage is concerned with Magic Range Brid, I usually just bring all of them out. I'll usually bring out ABS and G-Staff for Magic, magic, although G-Staff doesn't nearly get as much use, so you could honestly kick this one in most situations. As far as range is concerned, SGB, ECB, and Debo are the 3 staple EOFs. Now here on a dummy, it's not big enough to take advantage of SGB, so I didn't use it in this specific example, but with a standard DS rotation, just go ahead and use the SGB where you normally would. The ultimate rotation here is not really changing too much. The main advantage of this hybrid setup is just taking advantage of ultimate cooldowns, so feel free to use your standard DS rotation at a given boss if you can take advantage of something like SGB, or dumping out as many Debos as possible, etc. So let's move on to the second combination, which will be range melee. Alrighty, I have a range melee preset loaded up and ready to go. Now how you're going to start this rotation is going to depend on a couple different things. It depends on 1, which boss you're doing and how it's set up, and 2, what combat style is best to start with at said boss. With Mage range, it's pretty much indifferent which one you start up with because they are self-contained with their crit buffing ultimates. However, with range melee, we can take advantage of late crit buffing ultimates and overlapping them into the next ultimate, in theory giving us unlimited adrenaline through always having some type of crit buffing ultimate active. Being that Incendiary Shot and Meteor Strike both last for 30 seconds, and each of their cooldowns is 1 minute, so you can kind of have them on a cycle to where the first 30 seconds, where the 30 seconds of one is already taking a chunk out of the cooldown of the other, thus kind of putting you on this process of infinite adrenaline gain. So when going into a boss encounter, you could either stall Incendiary Shot and then go into a Zerk, or just on a dummy press Meteor Strike, get a Gricko Adren buff from that, and then start a Death Swift. It honestly depends on which boss you're doing. Now again, this hybrid setup is more so a back burner. Not too many people are using range melee right now because magic is so strong, it's better to utilize that combat style. However, with potential nerfs coming to magic, we might see popularity in this setup rising a little bit, and it's always good to practice every combo just to learn new things and build up muscle memory and keep adding to the knowledge base we have as PVMers. So what I'll do in this example is I will just start with a Meteor Strike, go into a Death Swiftness, and get a late Incendiary Shot up. Now, as far as late Incendiary is concerned, you can use Death Spores to get a free Incendiary Shot. It will have a little bit of damage reduction, but since you're using Rapid and Snapshot and Gricko, and bow specs and everything else like that, you're going to be critting a lot, so you might as well get the free Incendiary Shot to then dump another Debo out or an SGB or something like that. However, it can be a little bit annoying when you don't get that many Death Spore procs, so it is kind of a play-by-ear type situation. But after I get the late Incendiary Shot in my Death Swift, I will usually let the rest of it play out. However, I usually will skip maybe the last second of my Death Swift to go ahead and go into a Zerk. And since we already have range as one of the main combat styles, it's very easy to take advantage of Hydrix Gricko because you don't have to worry about just prey swapping or using something like Ingenuity to Humans. You have the entire combat style right here, so if you're at a place that can accept hybrid in the first place, you don't need to worry about accuracy concerns for getting your Gricko Adren. So in Zerk, you can use Gricko as one of your first 2 abilities to then get massive adrenaline, and then carry on with a Zerk rotation per usual. However, I typically don't go for double Destroy and Hurricane. I like to go the more RNG route and farm out as many Dragon Claws as I can get. Sometimes it bites me in the butt and I'm left with no adrenaline, but with late Meteor Strike inside of the Zerk, and with Gricko basically giving adrenaline on demand, it's not too big of an issue in regards of adrenaline management. Alrighty, an example rotation of range melee would look something like this. We'll go ahead and charge up our Calg. Go ahead and target, and we'll go ahead and start with Meteor Strike, swap over to Gricko. We can get too much adrenaline, but we'll just keep building up until we get to 100. Then we can use Death Swiftness and start our rotation. I'll go ahead and hit A-Pot just because I can. Into a Bow Spec, ECB, go into a Gricko, into Attendees, Snapshot, and into a Rapid Fire. After that Debo, start building up some Death Spore stacks, hit the Incendiary, got a free Incendiary Shot, maybe another ECB, another ability. We'll go ahead and hit Debo. We're getting into the end of the Death Swift here, so we'll Gricko up. do one more ability, and then go ahead and do a melee basic. Walk away, hit Anticipate, Berserk, Barge, swap over to range, hit Gricko, and then back to melee. You get one more basic, bleed the Assault, hit the Overpower, another basic into the Meteor. You can go ahead and another Gricko if you really want to, and then start pumping out some D-Claws into a Hurricane, hit that Destroy. And Zerk is almost over with. But then you can swap into your DS and just keep repeating this process over and over again. That's basically the premise, where you can then build up more Deathspore stacks to get off your Incendiary shot. And as you can see, that is the basic premise of doing late crit buffing ultimates, is you can pop them in your rotation when you need them in order to always have a 10% benefit for every time you crit for gaining adrenaline. And as you can see, the adrenaline gain can get quite massive when using Hydrix Gricko. For reference, the offhand here is just my Coroming offhand. I don't even bother bringing the Aftershock offhand anymore, honestly. It doesn't feel like a very useful thing to have anymore. Sometimes I'll bring it if I'm doing some chin-heavy content. However, that's only really in Elite Dungeons, which is kind of a very specific situation. So I just bring this as my Coroming swap. You could even go as far as to have the Deathspore equipped, which give an extra 3% chance to crit, and go for Gricko with Bow of the Last Guardian, because it's going to have Coroming as well, and I think the results are roughly similar. With Deathspore, you don't get the Hydric effect possibility, however, you do get slightly more consistent on the crit hits for the Gricko, and from what I understand from other people testing, they seem to roughly equal out. However, most people still favor a Hydrix Bolt swap over using the Deathspores to try and gain adrenaline after Meteor Strike. Now, as far as EOFs are concerned, we have the 3 standard ones for range. We have SGB, ECB, and Dark Bow. And as far as melee is concerned, I bring the Dragon Claw. You could also bring Dragon Longsword or maybe Dragon Dagger, depending on how spicy you want to get with your EOF swaps. However, Dragon Claws is the tried and true and is extremely powerful, being it can give 4 hits in 1 global cooldown, and it's not a channeled attack anymore. And if you get really lucky with the D-Claw spam, you can dish out serious damage in a very short period of time. Now, last but certainly not least is going to be Mage Melee Brid, as it does use a Gricko swap while still using the 2 off-styles, and I'll get into the specifics of that shortly. Alrighty, here's the last combo for doing any sort of hybrid DPS. Now, back in the days of Solak release, Melee Mage Brid was a lot simpler, being that we were just doing 4-tick magic and a Zerk with Trim Masterwork. And even before Team W release, it was with Malevolent, but it's the same as far as the rotation is concerned, so 6 is one, half dozen the other. Now, the reason I'm saying this is that's when I mostly did Magic Melee Brid, and I have not kept up too well with the current rotations that involve just about every single switch in the book. However, I've been playing with it recently, and I happen to load up a preset that I've been using for ED1, kind of in the background and just testing a few other things. And I've been playing with using Gricko swaps inside of Zerk and after late Meteor and things like that. Now, Mage Melee is going to follow some of the same principles that we talked about in Range Melee, being that we're going to use things such as late Meteor Strike and late Tsunami, for the same reason that both of them last 30 seconds and have a 1-minute cooldown. And so if you time it right, plus you also have Incendiary Shot from ECB if you really need it, to basically have infinite adrenaline or access to crit-based adrenaline all the time. Now, the place this specific style of hybrid gets kind of annoying is when you start having to use Ingenuity of the Humans for your ECB. So I only really see this being used at places like Solak or Glacor, and I've been playing with it in Elite Dungeons where I can get away with Gricko swapping, but there's very few places where you can take advantage of just prayer swapping in off-style armor to get a Gricko off. And when you start using Ingenuity of the Humans, you're basically saving that InGen for after your late Meteor, and you're not going to be using it inside of your Zerk rotation. However, if you're at a place like Solak or Glacor, you are in luck because you can Gricko to your heart's content, because both bosses basically have 0 defense. And so, as long as you just swap over to the tier 99 prayer with your ECB equipped, or your Wyvern crossbow, I've even even seen some people use Royal Crossbow. The hit should go through and you should be just fine. Now, as far as the example is concerned, I'm going to be starting from the assumption that we have just finished a Berserk, or you could use some of the things of carrying an incendiary shot or building up an incendiary shot before your sun, and that will start the whole process of late Tsunami, thus starting the hybrid rotation. As a general concept, you need one crit buffing ultimate to kind of start the late ultimate process, if that makes sense. Because with magics, usually starting off on a boss, you're going to be doing just an APOT sun and Tsunami will be used inside of it, and then afterwards you'll be going through some sort of Zerk rotation, and then after that Zerk, or even on the tail end of that Zerk, you'll be hitting Meteor Strike, and that's what kind of kickstarts and gets the whole snowball rolling with this hybrid style. Now, the best way I have found to get off easy Gricko inputs after the Meteor Strike is just have ECB bound somewhere, or you can even click it from the inventory, and then on your main action bar, just go ahead and replace some of these inputs to kind of match. Like, I always have greater ricochet on S, so I just made the surrounding abilities, the 2 prayers, and a weapon to get me back to the main combat style that I was just on. And you could also go ahead and hit that keybind and immediately swap into the other style, and that would work as well, and that is kind of the easiest way I found for this to work. Alright, we have everything ready to go. Make sure we're calc buffed, and we'll go ahead and start off. So we'll hit with a Meteor Strike into a Gricko, and I'll just swap over to magic now, hit G-Conk, Sun, and we're off to the races. And already go for our FSOA spec. I'll swap over to Exsanguinate since we have the stacks built up. Go for a Wild Magic, 2-hit is fit, just kind of following standard Mage DPS principles. Keep an eye on this timer, and it's getting pretty low here, so I'll just go ahead and hit Tsunami now. Maybe another ABS spec. Into Attendees. Maybe finish it off with a Wild Magic and a D-Breath, swap over to Melee, hit Anticipate, Berserk, and Barge. Into a Gricko, another basic, and go ahead and hit the Bleed Assault. Another basic into a Overpower, Hurricane, and we'll go ahead and hit Meteor. Go for a Declaw 2 into a Destroy, and then here, after that, just swap back over to Magic, hit a G-Conk, and the cycle will repeat itself. So as you can see, I go into a Sun, build up, immediately go for another FSOA spec, so on and so forth. That's how the cycle kind of repeats itself. This is what I have found to work for me so far. It's not the perfect rotation by any means. As far as hybrid setups are concerned, Mage Melee by far has the most amount of improv required, which I find very entertaining and actually quite fun to go after, because it's kind of like the pursuit of perfection and being able to, you know, build up your improv skills to maximize the situation that you are given. But it can also be the most daunting to learn because it is the most improv heavy. Now, the general principles that I follow with this Brid style is, once I hit Meteor Strike, or any time that I hit Meteor Strike, right afterwards I am using Gricko. And the nice thing about this is that Gricko with a Hydrix proc will give a lot of adrenaline, plus it's usually going to crit pretty well. In most places where it's used, it only requires a prayer swap as far as accuracy is concerned, and then you can just go back to your normal prayer and a weapon to get you back there. And then as far as magic is concerned, once I swap over for my Sunshine, I usually build up all of my Insight Fear stacks with the G-Conk in whatever basic I use after Sunshine is started, and then maybe a little bit after FSOA spec, just to have all the Insight Fear stacks built up, because the Insight Fear stacks should last longer than you are going to hit Tsunami anyways, and so afterwards you can swap to Exsanguinate and not worry about it too much. And that's kind of what I use as a rough timing window. I still try and get out 2 Wild Magics, an Omni, a Tendies, and a couple of ABS EOF specs. And then afterwards, when I go into my Berserk, I usually will Bleed Assault and then hit Overpower and Hurricane. Usually I will be high enough adrenaline afterwards to go ahead and Meteor Strike. However, the timing of usually the later you can push off the Meteor Strike, the better. But once the Meteor Strike has been hit, that's when I go ahead and try try and get off a declaw spec or two, because these are absolutely massive in terms of damage, and if you get the right crit RNG, they can be quite helpful in returning almost all the adrenaline that they use. But then again, it is kind of RNG, but that is honestly the entire combat meta that we're in today. It's a lot of crit based and improv stuff based off of crit RNG rather than just consistent rotations, so we'll just play with what we have and do the best that we can. Now, I understand that my hybrid rotations are nowhere near the best, and they probably never will be. I am not one of those S-tier PVMers that are setting records on the daily, coming up with new rotations for people. I just kind of throw things at the wall and learn from others until I find something that works for me and kind of send it on my way. So if you have any suggestions for things that have helped you with your hybrid adventures, feel free to leave it down in the comments below. And remember that this is all part of the learning process in PVM, and yes, this is quite the end game setup. You know, I have quite a bit of endgame gear here in this preset and the other presets shown. A lot of it is endgame gear. However, you can boil these down, and maybe I will go ahead and do a budget version of hybrid DPS for those who really want to push the boundaries early on in their PVMing career, because there are still benefits to draw from it as well. As always though, if you have any thoughts or feelings, feel free to leave it down in the comments below, as well as if you have any tips or tricks as far as hybrid DPS is concerned. But before I go ahead and go on to an hour-long ramble about anything else damage-wise, let's go ahead and roll that outro. Ladies, gentlemen, and I did not forget about you Aram Wands, thank you very much for watching. Your viewership is greatly appreciated as always. Have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, nighttime, whatever it is, wherever you are, and I will see you next time for the next video. Peace.